I'll tell you exactly what I was doing when it happened, because that's the sort of detail you find yourself hanging on to afterward, the kind that shouldn't matter but does. I was unwrapping a toffee, a yellow cellophane toffee from the little paper bag Barbara had slipped into my coat pocket that morning because she knows I get restless in seats. The cellophane was making a sound like a small fire, and the woman to my left was giving me the look, and I was trying to peel it slowly enough to avoid a scene. That was the moment Edith Calloway walked out onto the stage. I want to be precise about this, because it matters. Nobody in that studio was watching for her. We had 400 seats filled with a Saturday afternoon audience. Pensioners, day trippers, a school group somewhere in the upper tier with enough energy to power a medium-sized city. And we were all there to see Derek Fenn. That's what we'd actually signed up for. Derek Fenn of the cufflinks and the tan and the enormous teeth, who had been hosting Saturday Night Showcase for 11 years, and had a gift for turning ordinary people into a moment's entertainment. You knew going in that was part of the deal. The show had a way of finding the gentle cruelties in amateur talent and dressing them up as warmth, and audiences laughed because it was easier than not laughing, and nobody went home feeling terrible about it. I'd been to the taping before, 2 or 3 years earlier. I knew the shape of it. I'd bought my toffees accordingly. The card on the screen above the stage read, Edith Calloway, 74, retired music teacher, Lostwick on SEA. Then a second line, hobby, playing the piano. The applause was the polite kind, welcoming but already moving on. She was a small woman, white-haired, neatly dressed in a lavender cardigan and dark trousers, the kind of outfit that takes some care to put together without looking as though you've taken any care at all. She walked to the microphone with a steadiness that I noticed only because I expected a flicker of nerves and didn't find one. Her hands were at her sides. She looked at Derek Fenn the way you'd look at a bus driver, not unkindly, but with a complete absence of performance. "Edith," Derek said, spreading his arms as though greeting a favorite aunt. "Welcome to the show, lovely. Now, retired music teacher. So you've taught piano your whole life?" "Most of it," she said. "Brilliant. Brilliant. And you've come to play for us tonight. What have you got?" She said something quietly, something the microphone barely caught. A name. A composer's name. Derek Fenn nodded the way people nod when they haven't heard a word and don't intend to ask again. "Wonderful," he said, grinning at the audience. "Wonderful stuff. Now, Mrs. Calloway, Edith, we want everyone at home to enjoy this as well, so let's keep it lovely and simple for us, shall we? Something the whole audience can follow along to. Maybe a little of happy birthday, or something they'll recognize from the telly. Can we do that?" He said it with enormous charm. The audience laughed, a comfortable, automatic laugh. The laugh of people who had been laughing at roughly the same joke in roughly the same way for 11 consecutive Saturdays, and found it no less efficient for that. Edith Calloway looked at him, not with anger, not with hurt. She looked at him the way you'd consider a weather forecast that turned out to be wrong. Briefly, without much surprise already revising, "I'll play what I came to play," she said, "if that's all right." You could feel the studio recalibrate. Derek Fenn gave a half-laugh, a recovery laugh, the kind he deployed to suggest that whatever had just happened was part of the show. "Well then," he said, gesturing toward the piano, "let's hear it." The piano was a Steinway Grand, the good one they brought out for the semi-finals, I was told, not the upright they kept in the corridor. It sat at the center of the stage under a light that was set for drama, but hadn't expected to be needed. Yet, it was the best piece of furniture in the room and it knew it. Edith Calloway walked to it without hurry. She didn't adjust the bench. She didn't roll up her sleeves or shake out her hands or perform any of the small rituals that amateurs do to show they know what they're doing. She sat down, settled her weight, and looked at the keys for a moment, the way you look at something you have put away for a very long time and are not certain you've done right in taking back out. Then she placed her hands. The sound that came out of that piano was not what any of us were braced for. I say that plainly because I'll be honest with what I expected, which was competence at best. The neat, slightly over-careful playing of a retired teacher who had spent 40 years explaining the instrument to other people's children and somewhere along the way stopped playing it for herself. I expected something tidy and perhaps touching, in the way that tidy things can sometimes be touching. The first phrase of the Brahms stopped my thought mid-sentence. I don't know if you know the intermezzo in A major, the one from the Op. 118 set. It begins without announcement, no introduction, no throat clearing, just a melody that arrives, as though it has already been playing somewhere, just out of hearing. And the room has finally gone, quiet enough to catch it. It is one of those pieces of music that seems to have been written for the precise emotional temperature of a particular kind of grief, not fresh grief, not the kind that makes you want to break things, but the old, settled kind that has learned to live alongside you. And still, some mornings, puts its hand on your shoulder without warning. She played it as though she had written it herself. That's the only way I know to say it. There was no distance between the woman and the music, no sense of a player and a piece proceeding on parallel tracks. The melody in her right hand moved with a weight that I can only describe as earned, each note landing precisely because it had been held for exactly as long as it needed to be before releasing, the kind of phrasing that takes years and years and then some private thing that years alone cannot supply. The left hand beneath it built a murmur of harmony that held everything up without calling attention to itself, the way the best structural things do. By the end of the second phrase, the laughter was gone from the room. By the end of the third, nobody was checking their phones. I became aware of Barbara's hand finding mine in the dark, which she has never done at a taping before, and I held it, and I watched Edith Callaway play. The middle section of piece darkens before it opens out again. There's a passage where the melody moves into the left hand and something almost urgent comes through, a kind of pressing, and then it passes, and the original melody returns transformed, which is the oldest and most reliable trick in all of music, and still works every single time a true player gets to it. When Edith Callaway came back to that first theme in the reprise, 2 rows ahead of me a man put his face into his hands. I don't know who he was. I never found out. He sat like that until the music stopped, and then he sat like that a little longer. She didn't play loudly. That's the thing I want to say to people when I tell this story, and they assume it must have been some overwhelming, barnstorming display of technique. It wasn't. She played at a volume that asked the room to lean in, and the room leaned in, all 400 of us, as though we had been quietly instructed, and had obeyed without thinking about it. The final pages of the piece softened to something barely above silence, the melody unwinding itself gently, and in that final unwinding, I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. And I could hear someone in the upper tier stifling something, and I could hear nothing else. The last chord resolved. She held it, let the room hold it with her. Then she lifted her hands, and placed them in her lap and was still. 400 people said nothing. I have been to concerts. I have sat in theaters, and watched things that moved me, and applauded with the rest of the audience immediately upon the final note, because that is what you do, because the convention of applause is itself a kind of warmth, and I have always believed in it. But there is a particular silence that a room produces when it has been genuinely undone, not impressed, not entertained, but undone. And that silence is different in kind from the pause before applause. It does not have the quality of readiness. It has the quality of a room that has temporarily forgotten what rooms are for. That was the silence in Studio 4 of the Callaway Broadcasting Center on that Saturday afternoon. 10 seconds of it, maybe 12. Then somebody in the upper tier started, and then the floor came up. And in 30 seconds, every person in that room was on their feet, including a number of people who were old enough that standing quickly was not something they did casually, and including the school group in the upper tier who had not, up to that point, been quiet for more than 40 consecutive seconds. Derek Fenn was standing too. I saw him from where I was sitting, off to the left of the stage, still holding his microphone. The enormous smile was not there. In its place was an expression I had not previously seen on Derek Fenn's face in 11 years of watching the show, which was the expression of a man who has been reminded of something he had clean forgotten. He walked to the piano. He stood beside it. He looked at Edith Callaway for a long moment, and she looked back at him. And then he said something, which the microphone didn't catch, and she nodded once, and that exchange was its own small private thing in the middle of the noise, and I am glad I was close enough to see it. When the room had settled enough for him to speak, he held the microphone up and said, in a voice that was different from his presenting voice, in ways I found I couldn't immediately name, "I owe this woman an apology." The audience went quiet again, a different kind of quiet this time. "I told her to keep it simple," he said. "I told her to play something the audience could follow along to." He paused. I don't know what I was thinking. More applause. But he put a hand up, gently because he wasn't finished. "Mrs. Calloway, I have to ask. I think everyone here has to ask. That piece, what was it for?" She looked at him. She considered the question with the same unhurried steadiness she had brought to everything else. And then she said, "My husband passed 30 years ago this coming March. I played that piece for him the night before he died. I haven't played it since. The studio took that in. Tonight seemed like the time," she said simply, as though this were a self-evident matter that required no further accounting for, and turned to look out at the 400 people who were watching her, and offered them something that was not quite a smile, but was near enough to one that it served the same purpose. She was escorted off the stage by a young woman in a headset, who looked, I thought, as though she had been doing this job for 2 years, and had just found out what it was actually for. I have thought about that moment many times since, about what it takes to carry a piece of music inside you for 30 years, to keep it folded away, because it belongs to something too important to use lightly, and then to walk out under studio lighting, in front of cameras, and 400 strangers and a man with enormous teeth who has just suggested happy birthday, and to play it the way she played it, to give it to a room of strangers, as though it were a gift you had been meaning to deliver for a long time, and had finally found the right occasion. For I think about that and I do not have words for it. I only have the memory of Barbara's hand in mine in the dark, and the man 2 rows ahead with his face in his hands, and Derek Fenn standing at that piano with his microphone and his different voice. I unwrapped the toffee on the way home. It tasted like nothing much. Barbara asked me what I thought, and I said I wasn't sure I had the vocabulary for it, and she said she thought that was probably all right, and we drove the rest of the way in a silence that was nothing like the silence in the studio, and also, in its own way, a little like it. I have not been back to a taping since. I am not sure anything else would quite do.